This is episode number 95 of the Photographing the West podcast. If you want to learn more about landscape photography, you're in the right place. Today I'm talking to fine art landscape photographer Perri Schelat. Welcome, Perri.
Hi, Kirby. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Glad we could finally work it out. So
Indeed.
for those who don't know you, tell everyone about yourself as a photographer.
Well, I'm originally from the East Coast, and I came west in 2008 to pursue a second career in photography. I decided after working in corporate America and doing my job too well and getting promoted that it left the vein of artistry that I enjoyed and got more into trend sheets and meetings. And I decided that I needed to follow my artistic heart. So fast forward to Missoula for 6 years, where I spent almost all of those 6 years in Glacier National Park and areas surrounding, like the Grand Teton National Park, Washington, the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, and really came into my own as a landscape photographer.
Okay. How long ago was that?
2008. However, I have been dabbling in photography since, oh gosh, it's probably been 25 years. But I really went after it as a career and a professional endeavor in 2008. And it's really been amazing ever since. Every trip, there's something new to learn. There's something new to see. Really, the sky is the limit. As long as you have a creative mind and a camera in hand, anything is possible. And we could probably get into that later when it comes to discussing techniques.
Okay, sounds good. So you're well known for your landscape photography. How did you get started in that genre in particular?
I think it is a soulful connection to the world around me, plain and simple. It is my grounding place. It is where I feel connected spiritually to things around me. It just gets me straightened out. And I feel free. I have a bit of a romantic eye, the way that I see landscape photography. At least a mentor of mine in photography school told me I was very much a romantic photographer. I didn't quite know what that meant, but I do romance the landscape. I extract beautiful, small and large, intimate scenes, grander landscapes. And I have learned to attach my own perspective on what I'm seeing and my own vision to portray that. And it just speaks to me. It fills my heart. And I think it's just really that. And that is what has driven me for nearly a decade and a half.
Yeah, that shows in your photography for sure. So we'll see that in a little bit. So, excuse me, you also do some intimate landscape photography. Is that new, or is that something you've always done?
It is not something I have always done. In fact, initially, I was really miserable at it. I did not know or think I was capable of dissecting a grand landscape into small scenes. It is a learning process, especially if you're used to using a wide angle lens that is really the workhorse in your camera bag. And mine is a 14 to 24. And when you're used to seeing that way, it's difficult to see with a 300 to 500 or something similar. So it took practice. And once I began to see in a smaller view, it became addictive. And then you start to see these small scenes with the same attributes as the large scenes have that make them successful and powerful. And you really do apply the same theories of a strong composition to a small scene as you do to a large scene. And I love the patterns. I love the flow. I love the dynamic, powerful aspects of small scenes. we'll get into later. There is a particular photograph of mine that has aspen leaves and moths, dead moths, laying on top of the aspen leaves in a pool of water along the North Fork Flathead River. And I saw it at a particular time in my life when I was very introspective, and I had suffered a great loss, and I was seeing things at a slower pace, and that I might have missed when I was really focused on seeing grander landscapes and using the shotgun effect, which means running around and photographing as many places as I can. You can't be that thoughtful when you're doing that. And I think if I had been in that mindset then, I would have walked right over that puddle and I never would have been looking down. So it is doing small landscapes and doing intimate scenes really is all about taking your time, being thoughtful, introspective, maybe making a connection to something, within you that you need to explore at that given time.
Yeah, it's definitely a different genre, and as you say, it takes a different eye, and that's something I'm occasionally able to do, but you do it very well, obviously.
Well, thank you. I do think that there has to be an emotional connection to what you are photographing. It has to speak to you. It has to say something to you. Not if it were just all about forms and patterns and flow, I think that it would be pretty boring. And the spirit in an image comes from the soul of a person and the way that photographer is shooting, feeling, and seeing. It's very true of landscape and also of intimate scenes.
Sure. Yeah. Good point. You have a unique eye for the landscape, finding new perspectives and compositions. Where did that come from?
Well, to be honest, it came from a growing process. I was the type of student and person that did not want to put my work out until I knew that it was the caliber of work that I would be proud of. So I will admit that my photography grew cobwebs on my hard drive for quite a long time. And I studied photographs from other people for years. Every day before I went to bed, I would look at photography in different places. When I would wake up, I would look at photography at different places. I'd study magazines. I'd study technique. I found my favorite photographers and I emulated them. And I took tours and workshops with them. One of my very great mentors and friends is Mark Adamus, who is arguably one of the most famous and talented landscape photographers in the world. And his tours are not easy, and they are arduous, and they make you think. And he pushes me to my limit, and I learned a great deal about taking photography and making it your own. And I would see things that I loved and I wanted to do them, but do them better and do them in a different way. And that's where I started with my wide angle with sharp focus from near to far. And they were dynamic. And I made a lot of mistakes in the field learning how to do it. And I finally succeeded. Try again. Even when you are frustrated, don't give up, stand up, brush the dust off and try it again until you get it right. And I eventually developed my own style. So it was really just a matter of working hard, looking at other work, figuring out what inspired me and try to make it my own in my own way.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Let's take a look at your photos. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, here we go. You see it okay?
I can.
Okay. Why don't you tell everybody where this is and how you took the photo?
This is on the southern shore of Iceland.
Ah,
And it's near a very famous waterfall that if I try to pronounce it, I'll embarrass myself. And so I will not. Uh, um, and it was across the street. I love flower and mountain shots in good light. I love the near to far sharpness. Again, in this photograph, I'm only inches from the foreground lupin. And it was just a magical time. It's called midnight sun in Iceland, when the sun really never goes below the horizon. And I was traveling alone, which made it exceptionally more difficult because I had to drive to each place around the island, which really limited my sleep. And I would be up at 12 midnight to 4 a.m. shooting. It was arduous, but well worth it. Some of my strongest photographs came from this trip. This is in a field of lupin. In June or July, lupin just grows wild all over Iceland. And oddly, the locals really don't like it. It's not it's really a very invasive plant or flower that has really taken over much of the fields around the coast of Iceland. The technique for this was a focus blend. So I chose different focus points from near, midground, and background so that it would be sharp all the way through. And so that I could portray it the way my eye saw it, which is not easy with cameras, as you know.
yes.
You have to, basically what my mentors have taught me, and I drill it home with my students, which is your camera is a tool. And if you can think it, you can make it happen. So whatever, technique that you want to use, if you can think it and you can combine it in Photoshop, the end result will be what you envisioned when you sat in front of that scene.
Is this also a composite?
No,
Okay.
it is, well, I'm not sure which, nothing is fake, if that's what you mean.
No.
Everything, no, it is a blend of 4 focus stacks, if I recall correctly, of 4 focus points. So foreground, midground, background, and then perhaps for the tip of the mountain. That's usually what I do, unless there are other things that I think are important to show and illustrate that might be just outside of each focal plane. I might add another one. So then I blend them in Photoshop and come up with a final single image that I may take to Lightroom and do some global adjustments.
Okay. Yeah, no, I just wondered if you'd used 2 different focal length lenses, since the mountains are still prominent, even with, I assume this is a 14 millimeter lens.
Yeah, did I say focal? I meant focus. So
Ah,
this is a focus stack. This is not a focal stack.
okay. Is this the one you were referring to?
Yeah. So
Oh,
this image won, I think, second or third place in Outdoor Photographers Nature's Colors, I believe last year, which made me extremely happy. I have placed in that magazine and been published a few times, but this one really meant something to me. This was taken in September 2018, just shortly after my husband Tom lost his battle with cancer and passed away. We had been married for 25 years, extremely happily, and it was a crushing event for me. I had spent a lot of time in Washington where we shared our mountain home together after his passing, and was encouraged by friends and family to take a trip to Glacier in September to try and reconnect with things that fed my soul. I didn't feel particularly inspired to shoot landscapes. I wasn't even sure if I could see, in the way that we do when we take photographs. And I just decided to wander with my camera along the Flathead River. And I spent a lot of time looking down. I don't think I would have seen this if I had not been that introspective and that thoughtful in that particular time. I looked down and saw a very small puddle in between rocks, and in it was floating aspen leaves and white moths that were dead. And it spoke to me immediately about the cycle of life. And I think because I was in that mindset, that's why it had such an impact on me, and why I even saw it. I love the abstract nature of it. I love the message. It's really quite simple and straightforward from a composition standpoint, but it was very difficult technically. It was dark. It was getting dark. There was not a lot of light. My shutter speed was slow. I didn't want to push the ISO up so far that it would be grainy and wouldn't be nice enlarged. It was tricky to do, but I managed to get away. Water moves, as you know, and things on top of water float and they bounce around. So I had to wait until it was still enough to get it with a decent length exposure that would render it sharp. And I was very, very pleased that it placed and won an award. It just feels like it was meant to be. I was meant to be there. I was meant to photograph it, and then I was rewarded for it, which made it extra specially nice.
It looks like you were shooting almost straight down, huh?
Yes, I had the tripod relatively low to the ground, and I had my 24-70 mounted, and I zoomed in quite far, which also complicated exposure time when you're zoomed in. And I found that it helped me to zoom in a little bit, cut out some extraneous stuff that was just distracting, twigs floating around and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a striking photo. Not one I would have seen, I think.
Yeah, I don't think I would have seen it either, Kirby.
This looks like it must have been taken in Olympic National Forest or somewhere similar.
This is one of my very favorite photographs that I took in 2018. It was the Oregon coast. It was near Cannon Beach up in the forests. And I wrote a poem that went along with this about a prince and a princess, and how they would always meet in this forest. Even if one died or if both died, they would come together in this forest and they would be free and love each other and be, with fairies and rabbits. And it was a very romantic poem. And again, it was illustrated so beautifully by this photograph because I feel like it is an enchanted forest. The way the light hit the sides of the trees and illuminated the background in these little peepholes, it was magical. And it looked velvety, almost like a painting. There's been very little done here in post-processing. This is pretty much what I saw in early morning light and a little bit of dampness and fog. It was just a stunning, stunning morning. And it is one of the only, it's one of my very few tree shots that I absolutely adore.
Yeah, having shot in the Olympic National Forest, it's a very difficult environment to work in, I think, at least for me. And you've captured that sort of setting very well here. It's just stunning.
Well, thank you so much. I do think that shooting forests and is so difficult because it is such a chaotic scene. And to make sense out of it, you have to have a quiet mind and you have to have an introspective eye. And sometimes things, you know, as simple as what does the forest floor look like? Is it a mess? Don't shoot it then. It needs to be pretty like the rest. And this was full of ferns. There wasn't a lot of dead trees laying around. It just was a really lovely, clean forest view. I I really love this shot, and it just speaks to me. And we talked earlier about how I'm a romantic photographer. I think you can see clearly here
Yes.
that this is a very romantic. It's a romantic shot. The light is romantic. The tones are romantic. Everything about it is just romantic. Maybe I should have been a romance novelist.
There's always time.
Yeah. So this is Yellowstone National Park last February. I have become an atmospheric junkie. I find that when you throw atmosphere at your photographs, it changes them, you know, exponentially. It takes a ho-hum photograph and catapults it to wow. And this was a wow moment. This was West Thumb. I only shoot Yellowstone in the winter, third week of January. I get just amazing atmosphere from the cold air hitting the hot thermal water. You have to be patient and wait for these little windows to open up where you can see beyond and through the steam, and for it to reveal the aqua beautiful colors of all of the thermal pools. I particularly like the little fossil looking leading lines in the foreground, which I put there, you know, on purpose because I feel like I needed a tie-in. I needed a tie-in with the foreground in the water to the background to make a complete scene that made sense. I find Yellowstone in the winter to be captivating, and there are so many options and opportunities for photographers there, from intimate scenes to large scenes, you name it, you can find it there.
Yeah, I've been there in winter, and it's definitely an entirely different park in the winter than it is any other time of the year. How did you manage to get around?
I rented my own snow coach from outside the West Gate, and did it for, I think, yeah, it was a full day. We went all the way south and then back towards the West Gate. I spent most of my time at Norris Geyser Basin and West Thumb. I did spend one night at the Snow Lodge and walked around and photographed in the lower geyser basin, or is that the upper geyser basin? I always get confused. But in any event, it was, for me, much preferable to have the snow coach to myself. That way I could feel relaxed and at ease about how long I took at each place and be a little more methodical about what I was doing rather than racing around like a lunatic with, you know, 10 other photographers in the snow coach with me.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a gorgeous photo. I agree. The fossils down at the bottom certainly add a lot. I wasn't sure what they were, but they certainly provide a nice leading line into the scene.
Yeah, I agree.
Iceland, I'm sure.
Yes. So this image is one of my favorites, and it's very misleading. I love the juxtaposition of the blue, black, and white. I love the how they really do complement each other in such a striking way. I also love that you really can't tell if this is an aerial or what it is. There is no sense of scale. And I really enjoyed that. And I played that up quite a bit. I waited for the tide to come in and out and in and out. Just exposed the shot at the right time when the water was near enough to cut the scene directly in half with the black sand and frame the ice so beautifully. So many people think this is an aerial. This was taken, this is just a small piece of ice that was by my feet, and it was tiny, but it looks like it could be a giant iceberg from the air. This
Sure.
one, what did this win? This won an award in International Landscape Photographer of the Year in 2017. I placed in the top 101 with this photograph. And of course, whenever you're rewarded and honored with something like that, that image really quickly becomes one of your favorites.
Sure.
It's nice to know that it's unanimous.
It's another stunning image for sure. I have no idea where this was.
So this was a trip that I made. It was my last trip before COVID-19 came to our shores. And this was February 2019. Yeah. And it's Glacier National Park. It's Lake McDonald.
Okay.
I went for 6 days and stayed in a Verbo near the West Gate. And I focused most of that time around the lakeshore of Lake McDonald. I love that time of year because the water is somewhat low in the lake before the snow melt starts to really fill it. And you can get out to the colorful rocks a lot easier when that level is low. And in February, there are many days where the water is still and reflective in this way. And most mornings, the entire lake is shrouded in a beautiful layer of fog that lasts until about 11 a.m. So this is clearing fog, very close, about, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes after sunrise, when the sun starts to clear the ridge behind you when you're facing this view. And it is also a focus stack so that I could get sharp rocks from foreground, midground to background. And then it was blended to a final image in Photoshop. And there were global and local adjustments done in Lightroom and Photoshop to manage contrast and tones and white points. Glacier is my most favorite park, I think, in the country. I have a fondness for it. It's like going home when I go there. And it's got so much to explore and so much to offer photographers. I never would ever get sick of it. It's like a family member. And when I don't get to see it, I miss it, and it calls to me. So I try to at least make 3 trips a year, but sadly, I was only able to make 1 this year, and Glacier was pretty much closed. The eastern side was pretty much closed to everyone. The only side that was open was the west side, and then going up to Logan Pass. So I missed it terribly, and I'm hoping that 2021 will allow us to get back into it.
Yeah, I hope so too. I miss Yellowstone in the same way, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's, I can see that you spent a lot of time composing this because you've got the mountaintops pointing towards the rocks there distantly, and everything's in sharp focus. So it took a lot of work, I would guess.
It did. I had to be, when I sit down and do something like this on a lake shore in the water, many times I'm in the water, and many times it's winter and it is, in Canada in minus 10 degrees. There is nothing uh, that is, fun about doing that. But when you are so immersed in your craft, you really forget about those pains, and really the effort is what it's all about, because when you're successful in the end, it feels like such a great achievement. And so I was somewhat in and out of the water for this, and the biggest irritation for me doing scenes like this are ripples in the water, waiting for those ripples, waiting for the wind to stop. And then, you wait for the water to do what it needs to do, and then the sky changes. And trying to
Yeah,
get everything aligned, it takes patience. And patience is not necessarily my virtue. I'm stubborn more than I am patient, I should say.
could have fooled me.
Yeah.
Love this one.
Do you know that this sat on my hard drive forever and I did nothing with it? I think there's a lot of truth to be said about letting your eye season as you progress in photography. The best advice I ever got from one of my teachers was, don't ever delete anything, not until you have been at this for a decade or two, because you won't have the seasoned eye you need to accurately, know and gauge what is a strong photograph. And I had this for a long time, and I revisited it. I had taken a trip to Lake O'Hara in Yoho National Park in British Columbia. And this is Lake O'Hara. And this is, I think it's called Oessa Lake. I might be pronouncing it wrong, but it's the trail on the way there. And there are lots of little alpine lakes on the way. And I think the reason why I never took this seriously is that I am so dedicated to my tripod, and I feel like a really serious photographer and serious landscape photo isn't serious unless it was shot on a tripod, where you can be methodical about everything being still. Your hands aren't shaking, the camera isn't shaking, you don't have to use an increased ISO. It's just the grassroots that I came from, to always be technically aware of my process. Well, I handheld this, and it was a higher ISO, and it felt wrong when I was doing it, but I did it anyway. And then I looked back at it and I thought, wow, that is one powerful image. The dynamic triangles, the shapes, foreground and background, all pointing to the reflection, the little pine tree that keeps your eye from going outside of the frame. I don't think that it would be as strong without that little element of a tree sitting there. I think it wouldn't be as interesting. And I think it's well balanced by the higher mountain peak that's in the background on the left-hand side. I think that they balance each other well. I think that the protruding little peninsula of grass that comes out on the far left side also balances that tree very well. I think that for me, what speaks to me about this powerful shot are the shapes, are these strong triangles, repeated triangles in this scene.
Yeah, I would say so. Your eye just wanders all around the photo, looking at the different shapes and colors, and it's a wonderful scene.
Thank you.
I love this one too.
So this is Iceland. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being in a rental van? This is midnight sun, about 3 a.m. And the sun is just starting to come up behind a mountain range. Can you imagine waking up to that? And just as you're about to press the shutter, all of these birds fly over the peak. I mean, and this was a very, very poignant trip for me. Tom, my husband, was supposed to come on this trip with me, and we were going to travel around the island together. It would have been my 4th trip, and I knew a lot of places, and I wanted to show it all to him. So he was not able to travel. He was in treatment. And I was afraid to travel by myself. I don't know why. I'm a strong, independent, brave person. But I did it anyway. I think I was supposed to be there by myself. I had a lot of time to think and be introspective, and it was a real opportunity for me for personal growth. I woke up to this scene. I grabbed my camera and I just jumped outside of the van right then and there, right in this pullout with my tripod, and started shooting. It was a gift for sure. I mean, these things you can see all over, but Iceland, but timing for all of the fog and the birds and the early morning light, I think makes it really special.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the birds actually add a lot to it, I think.
Yeah.
So are you camped out in your van, or you just
Yep. I drove around the entire island in this van called, oh gosh, they are called Happy Vans. I can't remember now what they're called. I think they're called Happy Vans, and they're great. They're these vans that are painted in primary colors, which makes them very happy. And they're well equipped. You can cook in them, sleep in them. And it was my home for 14 days as I traveled around the island, and super convenient to do it that way. I did not go into the highlands though, because I was traveling alone and didn't want to get into a situation where, I might have a flat or, get stuck in the middle of a river crossing. So I stuck to the outer loop. I did visit the eastern fjords. I didn't go anywhere that was very well known or populated. I lost myself purposely in the eastern fjords and a lot of fringe places that tourists don't normally go.
Yeah, it's definitely a different look from a lot of the Iceland pictures.
Yeah.
I assume that's you in the
It is.
mid-ground.
Yep. That is that's just a gorgeous glacier that I visited it on a different trip with Iceland Photo Tours, whom I think are just an outstanding group of people and outfit. I do, well, before COVID, I am an instructor for them, but have not had an opportunity to work for them yet. So I hope to do so in the future. But I love this shot. Yuri, who runs Iceland Photo Tour, took this of me. And it really does show how little we are in the grand scheme of things. And, that is easy to forget when you're stuck in your own head every day. And that is part of why I love this passion of photography so much. It really does make you look and appreciate, feel gratitude, and be grounded. And that picture says it all. That really does illustrate all those things for me, and that's why I love it.
And the shapes and the textures in there are wonderful as well.
Yes.
Okay, I have no idea what this is, but it's interesting.
So this is an aerial shot from a helicopter of the southern river deltas in Iceland.
Wow.
Now, normally, and these are, little ribbons of water. Now, normally they aren't quite so flooded, but this was another trip when all it did for 10 days was rain and pour. And so all of these little deltas were flooded. And it was difficult to shoot because there was so much flooding. You didn't get the beautiful strands that you normally would get, but I really loved the tonal value to this, the cool and the warm together with the black backdrop. I love the contrast. I love the patterns. I love how they really, your eye just, goes on a wonderful, trip visually through this scene.
So what are we actually seeing here? It's impossible to know, at least to me.
It's water in these little river deltas, in these ribbons of water. And they lead out from land through rivers out to the ocean.
Good. And that's black sand in the
That's black
background.
sand. Yep, underneath it.
Okay. So technically, what did you use to shoot this?
I used my 24 to 70. I had two cameras mounted. I had two lenses mounted on two different cameras. I had a 14 to 24 and I had my 24 to 70. I wanted a wide view. I also wanted I didn't really want to deal with a telephoto lens and all that's involved with shooting with telephoto. And shutter speed and ISO and exposure time. It's really easier to maintain and handle those things in a wider angle. And I think on that trip, I used my 24 to 70 more often than anything.
Any idea of your exposure on this?
I would have to look. I don't remember what it was offhand,
Okay.
but I'd be willing to bet that my aperture was probably around anywhere between 5.6 and f8. And surely my ISO was cranked up to over 1,000. And I would imagine that my shutter speed was probably 100, 200th of a second, something like that, maybe even higher. I did try doing some at f6 and 2.8 with a longer shutter speed and exposure, and they were not sharp. So it really is trial and error up there. And I have done aerial photography a lot. I finally know what I'm doing and feel comfortable with my settings. And it seems like the smaller the aperture, where I can get a manageable exposure and shutter speed, they look the most flattering and they're the sharpest. I realize that you're shooting at infinity from the air, so you wouldn't think it matters, but honestly, keeping the camera still with your helicopter vibration and moving, it really does ruin a photograph in short order. So you've got to really be on that and be thinking about it. I will put it in a photo mode. Sometimes I'll do aperture priority so that I don't have to be fumbling around in manual mode. I've lost a lot of opportunities doing it that way. I'm kind of old school. I don't like the camera to tell me what to do. I'm kind of stubborn that way. So I shoot a lot in manual, and I've had a lot of teachers say to me, good Lord, get out of the dark ages and embrace your technology. If it can do something for you, then let it. And I'm not a very trusting person. So it took me a long time to agree with that mentality. And I do think that, if there is a reason, those modes are really helpful.
Sure. So this is handheld, I'm assuming?
Yes, it's handheld.
Okay, I think that's the last one. Okay, we're back. And so that was a great tour of your photography. Lots of wonderful images. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Sure.
So you're very organized in your approach to photography, I think, from what you've been saying and what I've read about you. So you do a lot of researching, scouting, and pre-visualization, yet you find unique perspectives and unique photographs, even in places that have been photographed to death. So how do you make all that work?
Well, previous visualization is really an important aspect to my approach. But there is also an element of being so driven in that regard that you could miss opportunities that are spontaneous. So I look for a happy medium. I don't want to miss something that is so dynamic because I'm so focused on this other, pre-visualization that I have. Usually when I go to a place, I've been there many times. I like to have a relationship with it. I like to know a place. I like to have walked it, felt it, stayed with it. And I think when I have done that, those photographs are the strongest and most thoughtful. You could do the shotgun effect where you run through a place with your hair on fire and, shoot 5 shots and hop in your car and go to a different state. There are lots of people that do that. I don't really do that. I find a place I love and I let it unravel slowly to me. So I do think hard about what I want to do before I go to a place. Usually because I've become such an atmospheric appreciator. I want fog. I want snow. I want snow on yellow aspens. I want something special that will take my image from ordinary to spectacular. And if it means I don't get the shot and I walk away, then I don't get the shot and I walk away. But I think that seasoned photographers such as myself, they're willing to wait. We aren't shooting as many photographs, and I think that's really important. But you have to go through the phases as you grow as a photographer, and you're going to take a lot, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to finally get to this place. It's just a general progression. It's an obvious progression to this place. I usually know what lens I'm going to shoot with. I usually have an idea because I have scouted the day before or at some point before the actual shoot is going to happen. I know what the weather is going to be like. I know through my apps what sort of atmospheric adventure I'm going to be on. I'm going to know the phase of the moon, if that's going to be involved in my shot. I'm going to be shooting in favorable seasonal conditions that will really improve the photograph in its entirety. I only shoot in winter, fall, or I don't shoot much in summer unless I'm going to alpine areas that are spring-like and they're wildflowers. There needs to be a reason. I do all of this research before I go to a place. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get sidelined by high winds when you have meticulously set up a shot for wildflowers with a mountain backdrop, and you've got fog and you've got the moon rising, but you didn't count on the wind blowing through at 30 miles an hour and wrecking everything. So these are the things that you have to just buck up and deal with. They're disappointments that everybody has in whatever they do.
Sure, true enough. So I'm guessing you're a do it right in camera person based on what you've said so far.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm guessing that you're a do it right in camera person.
Oh, yes. Yes. Without a doubt, I am. I have to say that I don't do a ton of post-processing. I don't have the patience for all of these actions in Photoshop and all of these other nuances. I have my own style that I have developed with Photoshop and Lightroom. It works for me. I'm happy with it. I think my photographs illustrate exactly what I saw. And I don't judge. If somebody wants to, do a lot of Photoshop and turn it into something that it wasn't, I don't really care. It's not my cup of tea. I have struggled a little bit lately with staying with my filters, my neutral density filters. I know that in the field they are so helpful to control contrast and highlights, and you get out there though, and they are cumbersome, and you have to attach them and go through the motions to use them. So I will admit that I have steered a little bit away from using them and bracket instead, and do an exposure bracket. But the dynamic range in my D850 is so fantastic that you could underexpose an image, 3 or 4 stops, and 5 stops really, and you could regain shadows without having a bunch of really terrible artifacts, depending on what ISO you're using. And that's okay with me sometimes. There was a trip to the Tetons about a year ago where I said, I am using all of my filters. I'm going back to grassroots, and I'm going to use them all in the field when needed. And everywhere I went, there'd be someone who'd pull up next to me on his or her tripod and say, oh, geez, you still use those old things? And I'd say, yes, on occasion. But I don't use them all the time, and I know I have photography friends who are dedicated to them and are ambassadors for them, and I get it. I get it. I know that they're doing it right in the field, and I am being lazy.
Yeah, I have to say I haven't used one of those in years, and haven't missed it really.
Yeah, it's cumbersome, and they take up a lot of room.
Yeah. So talk about what hardware and software you use. You're obviously a Nikon shooter.
Yes, I have a D850, an a D800, and a D810. So I've kept all the ones that I've migrated from, and I use them as backup cameras. I always travel with 2 or 3 bodies. I have had all kinds of things happen. I have had a camera tip over at White Pocket and smashed into 1,000 pieces on the rocks. I have had, I've been inside an ice cave in Alaska and in Iceland, and my camera and tripod was swept away in a creek in an interior river. I have, I'm just looking at a message I'm getting here. Okay, I'm going to close some stuff. Hold on one sec.
Sure.
It's telling me that the quality is poor because I have a lot of things open. Okay, there we go. Okay, Kirby, I forgot where I tied my horse. That's what we say in Montana when we forget what we were saying.
Yeah. So you were talking about hardware and software and losing things in ice caves and all that.
Yeah. So so the software that I use, I mean, I use all the Nikon lenses for hardware. Let me finish that thought. So I use all the Nikon lenses that you 14 to 24, 24 to 70. I've got a 300 to 500, a 70 to 200, and I have a couple macros. I have a 200, and I have a 500 macro, and I don't use the macros too much. I'd say that my workhorses are a focal range from 14 to 200. That's what I use most of the time. As far as software goes, I use Lightroom, the latest version of Lightroom, and I use Photoshop, and that's all I use. And I don't use them very hard either. I'm really proficient in Lightroom, and I love Lightroom.
Anything in particular that you like to use in adjusting your photos afterwards?
Sure, I like to use really all of the global sliders. I would bring up Lightroom and show you, but I can't. There is a particular module panel towards the bottom that works with lens calibration, and it's
Right.
got tonal sliders, and I love that thing. I also love the paintbrush. I like the radial eye tool, and I forget what the other one's called. That's, you can expand a little bubble and you can create a tonal adjustment inside the little bubble. It's a version of a radial tool. I love that. I love the white and black tone adjustments. I work that whole global panel from top to bottom.
Okay. What do you go to Photoshop for then?
I will use some layers to change contrast, masks and layers, to fix things that are a little beyond what Lightroom can do.
Okay.
And the way I have my workflow set up, I can do some global adjustments in Lightroom to contrast tone, highlights and white point. And then I open it in Photoshop and maybe do some additional masking and maybe dodging and burning. And then I will send it back into Lightroom. And then, so all my PSD files, I can see through the Lightroom module.
Okay. You also wanted to talk about the very difficult period you went through when your husband died. How did you cope with that, and how did it affect your photography?
Well, it pretty well drained my creative aspirations. I put my camera down for a long time, and I was worried that I had lost my interest and passion for photography. But I think when something is a part of you to that degree, you don't ever lose it. You may just have a roadblock. You might have some sort of impediment that keeps you from thinking creatively. This definitely affected me that way. I didn't photograph for months. And then I went on this trip to Glacier, February 2018, that really helped me open up that creative vein again and feel it again. And I felt inspired by him because he had dedicated a decade of his retirement to me and my photography. And we traveled together all over during that decade and expanded my portfolios. And I mean, he was very much a muse for me. He, was everything. And I took that energy, my affection for him and our bond, and took that energy and directed it into this craft and passion and love that I have for photography. He was so much a part of that creative aspect that I knew that I would not want to disappoint him by giving up. He would have been so disappointed and sad if his eventual passing had derailed what we had grown together. And I couldn't do that. That was the main fuel that kept me going. And I say that even today, 2 years later, it still keeps me going in that regard. It's been really difficult too with COVID now because I don't do tours. I don't do workshops right now. I haven't been out really much because I didn't want to fly or stay in hotels. So it's been a challenge to, right on the heels of losing him and losing my photography passion and losing my photography trips and endeavors, to then have it compounded by, the health aspect that our country is in right now. And doing that alone is difficult. So it has been a very challenging 2018, 19, and 20 has been very, very challenging. But I feel like I am coming out the other side, more focused than I was before, certainly more grateful than I've ever been. With tragedy, there are silver linings. And my situation was no different. And the silver linings for me are gratitude to be able to continue this endeavor in photography, gratitude for the decade that we had together sharing my photography. And I think that people can come back from a great loss and grief and throw themselves into something that helps them grow, helps them heal, helps them be grateful eventually. I think that if your mind is geared in such a way, it doesn't have to be a downhill spiral. You can climb out of it, and you can be better, and you can learn from it. And I certainly have for me. And I have great hope for my photography and my photography goals in the next decade. There are a lot of things I want to do and a lot of projects I'd like to try. And I'd like to teach, and I'd like to speak, and I'd like to do the adventurous Perri that I've done for the past 2 decades. So I would say to people who suffer great loss and get derailed creatively, if they are creative and that's what their passion is, not to give up hope, and to try to see the forest through the trees, that it isn't going to last forever. I did not believe people who told me you're not going to feel like you're being harpooned, through the heart every day. You'll eventually get to a place where you can feel grateful and embrace the silver linings that you learn along the way. And that is true. I can absolutely say that is true.
Any people in particular or any resources in particular that helped you get through that time?
Well, I'm very, very lucky to have wonderful, lovely friends around the country. I have a very close friend who lives near me. I have an incredible tribe of female photographers and male photographers around the country, many who I've met and many that I want to meet that I've not met yet. They rallied around me and held me up when I couldn't hold myself up. And I'll never forget it. It was a powerful gesture of love and compassion directed at me. And that was definitely an amazing feeling. In terms of any other distractions, and I really, there weren't really any. I didn't touch my computer. I didn't edit any photographs. I went on a couple trips early on in 2018. I went to Iceland with a very good friend of mine out of West Virginia who does a tour there last year, and another very good friend of mine, and then met 2 other very good friends of mine now. That helped me. To be around people and doing what I love helped me a lot. I would say surrounding myself with people has saved my bacon on more than one occasion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we go, tell everyone where they can find you and your photography.
Yeah, so they can find me at www.Perri Schelat Photography, where my website lives. They can find me on Instagram. They can find me on 500px, and they can find me on Facebook. So I'm really represented by all of the usual characters in social media.
Okay. Spell your last name for people that don't know how to spell it.
Okay, so it's Schelat. It's spelled Schelat.
Okay, good. And I'll put that information in the show notes so people can find it.
Okay.
So thanks, Perri. It's been great fun getting to know you more. And I love your photography, and I hope we can talk more about that in the future. Show notes can be found at www.flanaganfotos, spelled FLANAGANFOTOS.com. Both audio and video versions of this podcast, as well as prior podcasts, can be found there too. And you can also sign up for my newsletter there. Tune in on November 30th for a session with wildlife photographer Karen Gray. Bye for
Thank
now.
you, Perri.
You're very welcome. It's been great fun.